Welcome to the Consulting Growth Podcast. I'm Professor Joe O'Mahony, CEO of Equity Sherpa. We help owners of consultancies quadruple the equity value of their firms over a 2 to 4 year period. If you'd like to know how we do this, visit equitysherpa.com. Welcome, Caroline Boston, founder and CEO of New Minds.
Thank you.
Nice of you to join us. And so you've had, I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, you've had over 20 years now in resourcing of some variant or another.
That's right.
Could you give us?
Feel old.
Well, tell me about it. It's crazy, isn't it? It's I used to be able to get away of going into lectures and pretending I was a student and then standing up and surprising people. But those days are long, sadly gone. Could you give us a background in terms of how you got to where you are and what New Minds does, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course I can. So you're right. I've been doing recruitment, resourcing and talent management work now for over 20 years. So I started the first few years of my career in, I guess, more sort of generalist but very senior level recruitment with Spencer Stuart, which is one of the top international search firms. So I sort of have a background in research, which has been massively helpful throughout my career. But I've been working with consulting firms since 2003. I spent a few years in a specialist agency doing a lot of search for a mix of firms, to be honest. So some of those were big four firms, others were much smaller, some startups that have grown to be very successful since then. And then I spent 10 years in-house, so running recruitment and resourcing functions for smaller consulting businesses. And within that, doing a whole range of other things around talent and people development that I've taken with me now into the work that I do. And then I started working on a freelance basis, but it quickly grew. And so established New Minds just over 2 years ago, really because I identified in the market that working with smaller businesses in the consulting space in particular, there are some very specific challenges that those organizations face, that actually a recruitment agency isn't necessarily best placed to support in their entirety. But equally, for most of those firms, having a budget to recruit a senior level talent specialist is not really an option very early in their development. And so what I wanted to do through New Minds was provide the kind of support that those organizations needed, very specifically because we understand the consulting market, but to really act as a partner to those businesses. So the way that we work now is designed to feel as though we are an extension of their team. And so it's very different to a traditional agency, for example.
Yeah, okay. So does that mean that they pay you differently? So rather than sort of I guess you get a finder's fee when somebody gets recruited, but on top of that, I guess there's a revenue stream about ongoing advice?
That's right, yeah. So we do a mix of work. We do engage on specific, I guess, advisory or consultancy projects. And then we have a managed service recruitment offering, which is costed basically on a retained model, but with a success fee, as you say, once candidates are placed.
Okay.
So there are sort of two different ways that we work with our clients.
And do you do the rest of the HR stuff around sort of reward and assessment and training and development and that type of stuff? We do. The only things that we don't really get involved in are complex employee relations challenges, things that would stray, I suppose, on what I would broadly describe as the more sort of legal aspects of HR. But when it comes to performance management, people development, learning, training, as well as things that come perhaps earlier in the journey around organisation design, role definition, compensation models, those sorts of things as well. Okay, that is. But you mentioned earlier on that there were common challenges to small firms that are growing. I'm guessing, let's go through the life cycle. So you've got, typically a couple of people who get together and say, maybe they jumped out of one of the big four firms, and they've got their ambitions. They're bringing in a reasonable amount of money. Now, you and I will both have seen a lot of firms who want to play it safe, but less profitably with a load of associates. Now, I find that convincing people to go from an associate model to employing their first person is sometimes a bit of a challenge. I guess that happens before they come to you, though.
So it's quite common that organisations come to us when they want that first person.
Okay, right.
And so I think that's where we can be particularly helpful because it's not just about saying, right, we've written up a brief and this is what we need, off we go. It's an enormous decision. It feels very, very personal for those founders, I think. But it's also about much more than what do they need. It's about, well, why would anybody want to do that then? So you haven't yet got really any kind of brand as an employer. So how are we going to define what that is, and why this ideal candidate you're seeking would have any interest in joining you? Sure.
I was thinking as you were saying that there should be a phobia word for that first employee, because you're right. It is, it's obviously a risk rather than using associates, but speaking to some founders, it's been built up into their head until this absolute monster of a requirement on them that it is.
Yeah, I think that's right. We get a sort of shopping list.
Yeah.
We'd like this person to bring all of these things and these extra things that we didn't mention first time round, and be able to do all of these things. Essentially, we'd like them to do all the things that are keeping us too busy so that we can focus more on, the strategic vision of the business.
Sure. And it is a major challenge because as one of my interviewees said to me, if somebody has the connections and they're a good consultant, why on earth wouldn't they set up by themselves or go to, McKinsey on 10 times the salary or whatever?
I think that's an entirely valid point. And particularly when it comes to somebody who has those connections, I think where we see this working really well is if, as a smaller consultancy, you've really carefully defined, articulated and proven your quite niche proposition with clients that will appeal to somebody who shares that niche expertise, but perhaps is working in an organisation where it's not as valued as it might be in a specialist firm. What they do is only one of a sort of myriad of things that their current organisation offers. And so the opportunity to work with like-minded people and really innovate and develop around something quite specific can be very appealing. And if you meet 2 or 3 other people who share that passion, that's potentially much more exciting than trying to sort of plough a lonely furrow on your own, I think.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is a very lonely business being by yourself. And I completely get why people, roll up into partnerships. So is when usually the first hire, is that people looking for partners, or, I mean, in my experience, they often recruit partners through their own networks. And then they go for perhaps a junior or even an admin assistant, first of all?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. You're right. It's probably useful to have some sort of administrative support, albeit some founders will decide that a sort of virtual PA or some sort of outsourced model works fine for them. I think what typically is the case is that the role is most likely to be what I would very broadly class as an engagement manager. So in some firms that will be a senior manager, in some firms we'll call that a principal. But essentially what it is somebody who can anchor a client account and lead the delivery so that actually the founders are not spread so thinly. As you get to a certain point where actually there's only so many projects you can sell if you need someone senior to lead those. And that's where having associates feels potentially quite risky, I think, because they have a very different interest. Their interest is often predominantly about doing good delivery, not necessarily about owning and developing that client relationship, spotting opportunities for further work, proving the capability of the business through great delivery.
Yeah.
And so having an engagement manager gives you that real sort of sense of security. So that's generally where we start.
And so there's a few questions here. That engagement manager role, would they typically receive, because it's very often it's hard for firms to, spend a fortune on someone, but they do want someone of sufficient quality. So do they often get an equity slice as part of the package?
Rarely, unless they're already known to the founders and owners. So more common is to say there will be an opportunity for equity further down the line. Okay. And we all agree that we want to make that work. But it would be rare for somebody untested to be offered that right at the outset.
And do they often use sort of probationary periods or something like that? Because it is a risk for a smaller firm.
It is a risk, and absolutely you can use a probationary period to test that out. Because of what I do, I would argue for really rigorously testing the individual to make sure that actually you don't need to feel as though we've got this sort of backup of the probation period. Of course you have, but you don't really want to hire someone on the basis that you might well let them go. Yeah. And I think, and you're happy to talk more about recruitment in particular, but I think it's not only about testing that individual and the capability they bring and the alignment, but it's also really, really about managing expectations on both sides. What we find happens quite commonly is that you can go quite far down a process of discussions and only realise once that person's in role that you were talking at cross purposes the entire time. And I was talking about this with someone the other day, and he said, we hired someone, unfortunately we had to let them go, and they didn't really want to get their hands dirty. And I said, well, had you checked this before they joined? Because it was a senior person. And he said, well, we did ask him about sort of personal billable time, and he said that would be fine. But essentially, I think what happened was they said to the chat, how about having some of your time that's billable, and that sounded to the candidate as though it's going to be a couple of days a month in the sort of steering committees and so on. And in the minds of those hiring him, it was actually 2 or 3 days a week, facilitating workshops, leading a team on site, quite different. Yeah. And so unless you really articulate that, that's when you can get those challenges, I think. That's
really good advice. Thank you. And you mentioned the recruitment. So I know, the recruitment process for the large firms, once you boil it down, it's kind of, what's your background in terms of can you do the job? What are your specific competencies around and skills that you can offer? But also fit is a big part. You'll have your partner interview. Is that similar in smaller firms?
Yes, I think it is. Well, there are two answers to that question. There's what do I think it ought to be, and what is it sometimes? Okay. But if we take what it ought to be, I would tend to err on the side of fit coming quite early. Mm-hmm. But by fit, I mean alignment around the vision of the business, your personal aspirations and how they fit with the business, values, preferred ways of working. I'm trying very hard to kind of steer away a little from the term culture fit, because I think it's slightly at odds with trying to create more diverse and inclusive cultures. And that's very pertinent in this example, because actually the natural tendency of founders is to recruit more people like themselves. Sure. And then suddenly they turn around and say, oh, we've got a firm of lookalikes and we're not very diverse. Yeah. So I tend to use the term culture add rather than culture fit.
Okay, that's now I'd like to just explore that a little bit more, because there is this tension between, everyone says that the unique value proposition of the firm and the culture and the values and getting those clear and communicated and reflected in behaviours are absolutely crucial to small firms, especially as they grow, and you perhaps lose that one-to-one contact that the founder might have with someone. You need them to act properly, even though you're not looking over their shoulder. But at the same time, the dangers of groupthink and conformity can damage innovation. And I know some firms have managed that very well. Elixir,
Yes.
have been very good on sort of having a strong culture, but the one that puts innovation and creativity at the core of what they do. Is that a challenge that firms face? And if so, are there any sort of guidelines for overcoming it?
So I think the answer is yes, it is a challenge. And my view would be that it's not going to be something that will resolve itself. So you have to be quite deliberate about it. And so the easiest option is typically to say, my background is this. I know that people with a similar background will probably do a similar job. So we'll hire people like that. And then it's easy. The harder option is to say, actually, what is it about my personal values that I'm now building into this company and our ways of working? What is it that we have as our purpose or our vision as a business? What are the things that we believe are important in terms of how we communicate with each other, how we behave with each other? And actually, if we can define those, role model those, embed them in the business, then we can acknowledge that actually you could reach a similar place in terms of beliefs and behaviors through a different pathway. So you may have traveled a different journey to get to the same point, but actually those individuals will then, as you say, bring different approaches, different ways of thinking, different insight, and from a commercial perspective, probably a different network of people to talk to as well, which is really important. Yeah,
definitely. And how do you okay, so let me phrase this properly. Someone that is outstanding, that has the opportunity to go to, let's say, Deloitte, and do very well there, why would they choose a smaller firm over sort of, a more secure, potentially better paid job at one of the big four companies?
Well, I think pay is, let's put pay to one side, if you don't mind, because I think that's potentially a sort of slightly broader topic. But I think this is really important when it comes to being able to define what your value proposition is to potential employees. And what I would urge people to do if they are founders of smaller firms and looking to recruit people is not to try and say, well, we're an alternative to Deloitte, but you could do one or the other, but actually to really sort of celebrate the differences. So if you are looking for a smaller team with a less hierarchical and less bureaucratic way of working, then it's more likely that you will find that in a startup or smaller consultancy than you would in Deloitte. There are lots of marvelous things about Deloitte, and I wouldn't for a moment say that's not the case. But we must be clear that there is a hierarchy, a structure, an established way of doing things. The other thing I think that is really, really appealing to people is the opportunity to have personal impact on a business as well as on clients. And it's very hard to say that as a senior consultant in Deloitte, you will have much personal impact on the overall strategic direction of that business. Indeed, you probably won't have much personal impact on the ways of working of the entire UK team either, despite what internal projects you're allocated. So I think if that's important, you can see that very quickly in a smaller business. And it gives you, I think, a much greater kind of commercial understanding and potential appreciation of some of the challenges that your clients face if actually you're very much involved in a business itself and not just fixing clients' problems. So it brings that other dimension.
What percentage of your placements in terms of people that you're seeking to place come from the big firms? Because certainly in my experience, there seem to be two types of students that I educate that, go out, and there are ones who love the corporate environment, they love the structure and the process, and all they have to do is focus on doing their job. And there are those that spend 2 years there, the minimum for their CV, and then jump out as quick as they can to something smaller, perhaps more exciting, where, as you say, they have more ownership. So what percentage of yours, give or take, come from the larger firms and perhaps are slightly disillusioned with the work there?
I'd say that probably the vast majority.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. Not all, clearly. I mean, there will be people moving from one sort of smaller or mid-sized firm to another. There will be people who spend some time in industry, but the vast majority will come from larger firms. And we do a lot of our work through research and headhunting when we're trying to attract candidates, and openly acknowledge that the proposition, as we've defined it on behalf of whichever firm we're representing, will not be for everyone. And that's absolutely fine. There's a huge proportion of people within Deloitte who are thriving, really happy, and ideally want to make partner. But there's also a proportion of people who are looking at the partners and thinking, I'm not sure that's where I see myself. I'm not sure that's what I actually want to do, albeit I love working in this industry, in this profession, but I think I could be happier, more successful, more fulfilled in a different kind of environment.
I mean, I'd be interested in your view on this, because I think I can pick out a trend over the last 10 years, especially, where utilization rates seem to have crept up. That even firms like McKinsey and Bain are more commodified than they used to be, doing more implementation work. And pay rates are good, don't get me wrong, but they're certainly not accelerating in the way that they were in the 80s or 90s. It used to, in my day, it used to be the case that you could go into a client, show them a PowerPoint and wow them, they just throw money at you, and that would all, boost your bonus.
Disappointingly, no longer the case.
Yeah. Would I be right in saying that there are, in your experience, are there more people leaving the large firms than there were, say, 10 or 15 years ago?
Are there more people leaving large firms? I think broadly speaking, yes. And I think there are more challenger firms. I mean, you mentioned Elixir, they're one of a number of organisations. So there are more options. I think in terms of your comment about salaries, so we do a lot of remuneration benchmarking, and as well as doing that ourselves in terms of the data that we gather, I always read industry benchmark reports produced by others and so on, and was looking back at one produced in 2014, and then the same organisation had produced one in 2020, and actually the figures are almost identical. Very, very little movement indeed, I would say. So I think that absolutely backs up what you're saying, for sure. And I think in response to your point about kind of easy money for consultants, the other sort of thing I would point to is that there are probably now more ex-consultants in industry as buyers of consulting firms who are more sophisticated in their understanding of what they're buying, and therefore probably more demanding.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, it's not. There's a student said to me a few weeks ago, he said, "Where are the easy jobs now?" And I said, there aren't any. It used to be that you could even hide in government in a well-paid, nice job, and actually only work a day or two a week. But with the transformation that's happened, those jobs have gone too.
If you identify them, give me a shout. But I'm not sure I know where they are.
Yeah. So talking of the supply side, one of the major trends, and I have a lot of my clients who are asking about people with data skills, data analytics, big data, AI, coding, as well as being a consultant. They want them to have this skill as well. And those people are clearly in demand. You look at some of the salaries that are coming out, even from graduates. And it's what Goldman Sachs are paying, but they're going to Facebook or Netflix to work. So I guess is that a feature? Is that an increasing feature of the people that you're recruiting or looking for? And if so, how the hell do you find them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So is it an increasing feature? Absolutely. So I think in terms of the sort of clients that we're working with at the moment, we're working with more organisations now than ever before with that as an area of specialism, but also our more generalist clients, that I would put broadly in the sort of category of strategy or transformation type work, are increasingly looking for that as a skill set in a way that they weren't even 2 or 3 years ago. So these individuals are in demand. And I think, so some quite canny people are obviously, experienced consultants are kind of upskilling in certain areas if they have a particular interest. But for those coming out as graduates with this kind of capability and going into those sorts of roles, I think they will continue to be in huge demand. And I think it is also prompting businesses to look more broadly in terms of the candidate pools that they're fishing in. So where we might, there's historically within consultancy, there's just been a lot of movement between firms, but actually sort of broadly the same skill set and the sort of sense of reassurance that if we hire someone from another firm like ours, they probably know what they're doing and it's a fairly easy transition and so on. Whereas now I think businesses, large and small, are looking more broadly at other organisations, such as the ones that you mentioned. Where are the people doing really, really interesting work that we could bring into consultancy? Equally, there's a risk of those organisations wanting to take your best people out as well. So there's demand from both sides, I think. Yeah,
well, yes, and also I guess with the disruption of business models, you're seeing. I was advising a digital consultancy for the last year or so, and all of a sudden they've said we're going to go down the platform route now, and we're going to get rid of all the consultancy. We're going to build a platform, and in effect sit in the middle and take a slice out of putting people together. And with software becoming a bigger option, I guess there's more business models out there that challenge the traditional leverage people-based consultancy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's absolutely true. And that if you are going to maintain that traditional model, then what you offer, how you offer it, how you price it, is probably having to change it as a result. I think there remains a market for demand for the type of skills that only a person can bring, but you need to be very clear on what those are and be able to articulate and differentiate those, because there are so many things that can be automated for sure. So.
Yeah, sure. Yes, okay. We touched upon, so you gave us a good overview of what attracts people to a firm, having a clear people proposition and the excitement of starting something new and influencing the business itself. I'm interested also in what keeps someone. So I presume occasionally you'll get, you'll place someone and, it'll be great. And then, 2 years later, they're knocking on your door again saying, look, thanks for that. But so I guess part of that is to do with the consultancy mindset. There's almost, the grass is always greener. They're ambitious, they're, confident. But if I was running a growing consultancy, what's my best bet for keeping good people aside from paying them loads of cash?
I mean, cash helps, but actually I don't think it is the main thing. If you're underpaying people, it will be a problem. Sure. But I don't think you need to overpay people to keep them. What generally makes the difference is whether you actually, I guess, think quite deliberately about different aspects of your people's strategy, or whether you neglect to. So, and I'll explain a bit more what I mean. So where we see people who are disillusioned and tend to leave, it's because they were sold quite a good story that then it didn't really pan out, I suppose, in terms of the lived experience. And the danger is, of course, that in a small consulting firm, client work, client demands will always take precedence. And so it's very easy to neglect things like performance management. And I mean, when I say performance management, I'm talking about the sort of positive aspects of that. So performance reviews, acknowledging contribution, developing people, and then providing opportunities for growth and promotion. And I think you're absolutely right. There is this sort of sense the grass is greener, but I would put that in a sort of different light and say, great consultants are naturally ambitious and naturally curious. And so you need to feed that, and you need to feed that by giving them opportunities to learn, to take on more responsibility, and they want to see what that trajectory looks like. And it doesn't have to be a very, very complicated jump through hoops promotion process, but it needs to be, I can see where I'm going in this organization. I can see what more I could add, how I can get there, and that people want me to do that. So that's a big part of it. And then I think, the other is around culture and values, and whether actually what you say you do is what you actually do.
Sure.
And again, particularly now with people working remotely, but frankly, it applies to consultancy anyway, because you've always had people on different client sites. They're not all together all the time. You have to do something deliberate about that. It's not going to just happen that everybody marvelously gets on and thinks that the values are embedded in every aspect of the organisation. You have to role model that, and you have to work at it.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. That's really useful. There was a question I meant to ask you when we were talking about recruitment, and I forgot to ask it. And that is, so I teach 400 to 500 students each year in the business school, a good percentage of which want to go and work in consultancy. And you get those who go to the large firms, of course. But there's some that don't want to. Do you deal with many graduates? And if so, what skills would you suggest I teach more of?
Okay. So we do deal with graduates, probably not in every firm that we work with, because some are not yet of a size maturity where they can offer the kind of support that they would need to if someone joined them as a graduate. Yeah. And as you sort of referred to earlier, frankly, sometimes it's easier to hire someone with 2 years in a larger firm that's had the grounding, and then you bring them on. But we do work with a number of firms that hire graduates and have supported them with that. I think the things that stand out for me, and I was actually doing a graduate interview only a couple of days ago, so I have been giving this a bit of thought. The things that stand out for me are there's something about self-awareness that's really, really appealing, that actually somebody authentically can demonstrate that they've given some thought to what's genuinely important to them in their career, how they like to work, how they don't like to work. Because I think if you're joining a smaller firm, those things are so crucial. And so without wishing to be dismissive of larger firms, some of the more kind of stock answers that a much larger firm might accept are less interesting to the founders. They really, really want to kind of get under the skin of why you're interested in their business, because it feels much more personal. So I think there's something there. But I think the thing that will set apart a great consultant, somebody who has potential to be a great consultant, more than anything, is probably empathy.
Okay.
And by that I mean, there are the majority of consulting skills, toolkits, etc., can broadly be learnt. So you can learn to be great at PMO and governance. You can be great at business analysis. If you have the interest and inclination, you could be great at data analytics. But actually, what makes you successful with your clients, able to develop and then deliver innovative solutions, and ultimately able to sell, which is a whole other topic in itself, but something that I believe is really core to the consulting skill set right from the outset, is the ability to empathize with your clients, to understand their point of view on a day-to-day basis when they're not happy with whatever you've produced and they seem cross. Why is that? What are the things that are driving them? What are the pressures on them? What kind of things will they respond best to? right through to, very senior people that you're ultimately trying to sell to. What are they trying to achieve for their business? What are the things that are really important? What problems can you solve for them?
Yeah, that's really nice. There's a lovely piece of research, I think, that was in the Academy of Management Journal a few years back, and they looked at what clients said they wanted out of a sales meeting versus what consultants said they thought they wanted the clients out of the meeting. And for the consultant, it was all about the solution they were selling. Here's the box. Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it great? It's going to this price. And the clients, exactly as you said, they actually wanted somebody to understand them and to focus on sort of the general challenge rather than saying, this is how we fit into that box, which shouldn't be surprising. But, most clients were saying, actually, they're dissatisfied. In fact, a lot of them were saying they'd rather search online than have a sales meeting because they were sick of consultants trying to sell them the box.
Yeah, no, I can believe that. And I think if a sales meeting feels like a sales meeting, then you're probably doing something wrong, to be honest. But sales is such an interesting topic because it's one of the things that people come to us about most often. So people will say, what we really need is somebody who can sell. And there's this sort of fear within the consulting industry as a whole, and this doesn't apply to everyone, but it applies to a lot of people, that sales is somehow this sort of slightly grubby thing we have to do that's sort of a bit akin to double glazing, but actually it's a bit dirty. We don't really want to do it, but we know we ought to. And I struggle with that because I think in my mind it's a natural extension of your consulting skill set, that essentially as a consultant what you're trying to do is solve problems, and those problems will vary depending on the sector you're working in, and the type of consultancy that you work for. But essentially you're solving clients' problems. If you're not, then I'm not sure what you're seeking to achieve. And so actually once you get to a point where you have done this for a while, where you've got insight from different clients, where if they have a problem, you've probably got in your mind some thoughts as to what the solution might be, then being able to articulate that and explain how you could help them solve that problem, well, that's the sales process. Of course, you need to be able to price things and go through commercial negotiations, but ultimately, it's an extension of what you've been doing all along if you've been doing it right.
Yeah. Yes, it's interesting. I talk to my students about empathy and interpersonal skills and all the rest of it. And it's a question I always ask my MBA class. I say, who here thinks they have above average interpersonal skills? And everybody in the room puts their hand up because it's
excellent teaching.
Well, I wish it was that. I always say, either this is a massive coincidence and you all do have above average interpersonal skills, or you are overestimating your ability. And I think, especially when you're younger, it's such you've got friends, of course, and you've got family and you chat to them, you can go down the pub. So people think that's an interpersonal skill. But, what you said about empathy in the sales process, I think is really insightful and not talked about very often. Because it's almost the reserve of psychiatrists and psychologists, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I think you're probably right, and yeah, absolutely. It's interpersonal skills are difficult, and I'm not sitting here professing that I'm some sort of expert in that either. Or, although I can certainly say I've built relationships with a lot of people through the course of the last 20 years. But I think you're right. Friends, family, people who like the same sports as you. Not always massively challenging, whereas actually somebody much older in a client organisation than you, thinking about your students, somebody who's done this job for a really long time, and genuinely their intentions are great, but actually they're perhaps not particularly efficient, not aware of how other organisations might do it. And to be able to take somebody like that as an example through a change management process requires a great deal more empathy than it does to build, to make friends with people on your course.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you. So I don't have one question. Well, getting off the subject slightly. So first of all, where can people find you if they're looking for resource or if they're thinking about joining a new consultancy?
So I'm on LinkedIn all the time. As you can imagine. so always happy to connect with people. And our website is new-minds.co.uk.
Okay. And also a question about the business generally in terms of your future. I mean, I know you've grown a lot and done incredibly well in the time that you've been around. Do you have any plans for the future in terms of, adding new services or looking at new areas?
So we are growing, which is lovely to be able to say. I'm absolutely determined that we will only ever work in the consulting space.
Okay.
I think what we do isn't unique, except that we have this particular area of focus. So what we really know and understand is that space. And so that's what we will continue to do. I think it will be interesting for us as we evolve. We work with growing firms. The recruitment part of our business has been probably the biggest area to date, because firms come to us when they're in that sort of growth mode. But actually, increasingly, we're now doing more and more work on those other aspects of people and talent. So I'm expecting that part of the business to grow. We're building some partnerships with other organisations and individuals that specialise in particular areas that we don't. So, for example, that part of HR that we don't do, we have a specialist partner that supports us on that. We work with some individuals around leadership development. So we're sort of broadening our own network as well. And then I think the interesting thing is going to be that our firms are growing. So I'm not going out to try and work with Accenture or Deloitte because that's not where we specialise. But actually, at the moment, our largest client has over 100 people and is opening offices internationally. When we started working with them 3 years ago, they were 35, 40 people.
Wow.
Now, I can't take credit for every one of those hires. I wouldn't even start to, but I think we've certainly contributed to that growth in our own way. But where will the firms that we're working with now that have 15, 25 people be in a few years' time? And so what will that look like for our business model? And it's, a privilege to work with some of these organisations and to watch their growth journey, to contribute to that, to experience it with them and to be able to say, we've seen some of the potential pitfalls that are coming along the way, because some of our clients are 30, 40 employees ahead of you. And so actually these are the sorts of things you should start to anticipate and prepare for now. Yeah,
it is. It's fascinating. So I've now interviewed, I think, 75 founders of consulting firms who have grown them and then sold them. And as you'll know, you get so many different stories and so many different personalities and so many different types of firm, which sounds crazy given that it's all, loosely management consulting. It's and you meet so many different types of leaders, which always surprises me.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it is much more personality driven. When you're running a small firm yourself, then your personality inevitably has an impact on that business. And you're right. We work across a huge number of consulting capabilities, firms that work across a range of sectors. I am also naturally very curious, and so I love the fact that we get to learn about some really niche areas that frankly I probably didn't know anything about before. So we're very lucky in that regard as well. Yeah.
Okay, Caroline, listen, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and best of luck for the future.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. Bye-bye.